Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and we not only have an amazing and a brilliant entrepreneur here in today's episode, but a really freaking cool one at that. I am so excited to talk to and to interact with and to learn from today's guest because this is someone who has an incredible background, whether we talk about her academic accomplishments and achievements today or her career as a professional musician or as an entrepreneur, all of the amazing things that she brings to her clients and the way that she services people. I just think in so many ways she makes the world a better place. So let me tell you all about today's guest. Her name is Taylor Mizuno-Moore. Taylor is the founder of Mizuno Consulting, which is where she integrates organizational consulting and individual support. She helps bring meaningful and sustainable change that requires a holistic perspective that addresses both organizational and individual needs simultaneously. Mizuno Consulting provides organizational consulting on a strategic planning, change management, leadership development, team building, and collaboration perspective, as well as performance management and organizational culture transformation. If you're thinking to yourself, Brian, these sound like huge topics to cover in one episode, that's what Taylor is going to help us navigate because she brings through all of her prior experiences such an interesting perspective on all the things. So I'm personally very excited about this one. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Taylor Mizuno-Moore. All right, Taylor, I'm so very excited for you to be here on the show. First things first, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Heck yes. I feel like, truth be told, I always love bragging about our amazing guests. I only scratched the tip of the iceberg for all the cool things that you've gotten into. I didn't even mention, Taylor, you're a licensed clinical professional counselor. You're an organizational consultant. Obviously, I tooted your horn from a musical perspective, but take us beyond the bio. Who's Taylor? How'd you start doing all these amazing things?
Oh, goodness. I think a lot of our upbringing really influences who we become in adulthood. So from a very, very young age, I was very interested in music, and I was interested in the relationships that I was introduced through music, through being in a band and getting really rad jobs, like working in film and television and lots of stage stuff. Obviously, I think there is a moment when you're a musician where you think, is this sustainable? And so I decided to go back to school, and I really felt like I thrived most with connecting with those musicians that I was working with and community, and really wanted to make a living at it. So went back to school, got my degree in counseling, and just kind of took off from there. And here I am. It was kind of a crazy ride. Nobody would have told me that I would be here maybe like 10 years ago.
Yeah, I love that, especially because what I find is so difficult for all of us entrepreneurs, and I imagine it's especially true for you, Taylor, is that we are multi-passionate. There's so many different parts of what lights us up, and I want to introduce this really early on into the conversation because part of what I really resonate, besides our love for Los Angeles, and obviously both of us have a background there, is the fact that we do come from immigrant families. So myself, I'm the son of an immigrant mom, and I know that it's played a key role for you. It sounds like your dad, for example, is really cool. He's got a cool story about growing up in Southern California, but your family obviously provides such an important perspective that you have on life. So talk to us about navigating not only those multi-passionate waters, but for you also navigating all the different labels and roles and identities that have helped shape who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, American language didn't really do me a service growing up, in that I was always labeled like multiracial or biracial, this separateness when we're faced with that prefix bi, being bisexual, being biracial. What it really did was open up possibilities, but I think when you're a kid, you get very confused very fast in which identity should I choose, or which identity do I need to explore? And that's really what I spent I just did the math earlier today, the first like 23 to 27 years of my life exploring, which is my dad's side, which is white, Southern California, surfer. Think of, like your cheesiest surf movie in the entire world, and that's probably what his life looked like, versus my mom's side, which is Japanese American, third generation. Academics was always very important. Like rigidity versus flexibility, and seeing those worlds clash and trying to figure that out really became a challenge. So, but over time, I feel like something clicked in adulthood, and I asked myself, okay, how do I take these experiences and how do I channel this in a way where I can make it easier for others? It's like, don't do something or don't try something if it's already working, or like, how the saying goes. And so I wanted to make it easier for other biracial folks and other queer folks to explore their identity and explore what their opportunities are without getting too wrapped up in the weeds of this expectation of their identity label. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, for sure. It makes sense. And I do want to go deeper there because I think it's interesting. And you and I are probably going to weave so much through today's conversation of talking from a business and an organizational perspective to also the individual stuff that not only do your clients face, but I would argue we all face as entrepreneurs. There's so much mental stuff that goes into being an entrepreneur, and there's self-doubt and there's confidence that we have to build. Gosh, we navigate so many of these complex issues. So Taylor, take us into the work that you do as far as fitting all of these. What I always find interesting is you and I, we fully embrace the individualistic nature of entrepreneurship because it's the easiest part to look at, because when we start, it's just us. But your work really looks at how that also meshes well with an organization, which is a collection of so many different individuals. How do we start to make sense of this very complex world of all these individuals working together?
Well, if I can simplify it in any way, that's my goal, because life's already confusing. We don't need to make it more difficult. So what I have found is, through research and through personal experience, is that we really thrive on our interactions with people. So we want to invest in people. We want to invest in relationships. I think the pandemic really highlighted how much people and those relationships influence our day-to-day. Through my work with clients as a therapist, there's a lot of isolation and a lot of missing out on collaboration and fostering new ideas. All that came to a halt during the pandemic. So now that we have this opportunity, these amazing platforms where we can connect over tech and all of that, I mean, the opportunities truly are endless. So then how do you kind of like silo it down to be a little bit simpler? So what I found is that organizations, I'm an organizational consultant. Like, well, what does that mean? You have to break it down into smaller pieces. And so what kind of pieces do you want to focus on? So me, myself, I think that individual interactions are so important to the foundation of an organization. So leadership teams, who you're going to work with to build your marketing platform, those relationships and what it feels like, that goes out there in the universe to your client. And so what you really want to do is you want to reflect the inner workings of your organization out there to the community. Everybody has their own niche and everybody has their own specialty. And so what I wanted to do was bring everybody together that has a collective background of organizational consulting, but then give them the mic and let them take off when it comes to their specialty. So we have someone that specializes in law enforcement, somebody that specializes in aerospace engineering, marketing, restaurant hospitality, myself, healthcare, and DEI. It's really important that you give folks the opportunity and the flexibility to really exercise those, I would say, skills and education knowledge that they've built over time. Let them thrive and maybe perhaps stroke their ego a little bit. Everybody loves a nice ego stroke. But then to come together as a more macro level, it's like, okay, well then what's our shared experience? An organization. Let's try and meet in the middle there.
Yeah, I really love that overview because you explain it in such a logical way that we can see the individual pieces and, importantly, how they come together, which I guess thinking about your background and your vantage point as a musician, I'm going to pick on that for a little bit and use it in contrast to being a licensed clinical professional counselor, because to me, outwardly, they seem like such totally different hemispheres, totally different universes, Taylor. Whereas you've got the musical side where there are no right answers. It is pure creativity. It is pure exploration. Whereas coming at it from a clinical perspective is obviously it's leaning on past research and things that other people have done. What do you see as the similarities and the differences within those two realms? Because obviously you've mastered them, and I would argue it creates part of your unfair advantage is that you have both of those backgrounds. How do they play together?
That's such a great question. It actually took me a couple of years to figure out where's the intersectionality here. And what I have found is that being a therapist and being in the clinical field can be a bit of a performance, in that you pull from things that are muscle memory, like clinical intake, assessing for harm, or assessing for, anxiety, the things that most humans struggle with. And at the same time, you want to put your best foot forward, put your, I want to say, most likable self forward in order to connect with many different kinds of people. Now, if I was to say, show up to a Zoom session and don't turn it on a little bit, the likelihood of a connection is going to go down. So it is a bit of a performance, but over time, especially as into a more seasoned role, it becomes more and more authentic. And I really hope that is the professional self that gets communicated to clients. So when I think about therapy, I do think of it as an art form, because you're pulling from knowledge that you've practiced and knowledge that you've gone over and written papers about. But then how do I translate that to a community or to a person in a way that makes sense to them and is maybe perhaps enjoyable?
Yeah, for sure. And hearing you talk about translating it to the recipient, which I think in business and in life, we so often need to remind ourselves that communication is only as effective as the way that it's being received. And so I want to ask you about that receptiveness, because you get to work with individuals, but also with organizations. And when we're talking about big words like culture transformation, Taylor, are these companies ready? Obviously, the ones that you work with are ready, but what do you think is that igniting force or that catalyst with companies who say, you know what, it's 2024, we're on the verge of 2025, times are changing, the world is changing very quickly. What's that catalyst for companies and organizations to look within and say, you know what, it is time to transform our culture?
Oh, absolutely. I think, really listening to your employees. So from top down, I think that there is this implied culture of, I'm going to tell you what it's going to be like, versus why don't you tell me what you prefer and then let's move forward from there. So I do think that if you do have a hierarchy in that way, listen to your employees and let them tell you what they need, then move the company forward with that. Let that be the guiding light, because I don't think that leaders really have clear expectations for their employees, especially if they're new to an organization or if it's a startup, that sort of thing. So let your employees be the driving force of that. As far as catalyst and as far as how do you make that happen, it's really kind of acknowledging that you don't have all the answers, and that's totally okay. No one expects you to. So setting the ego aside, being okay with, I'm going to make a mistake. This isn't going to be flawless. Why don't we have a conversation about how we can make this better and what you have envisioned for yourself? And those aren't conversations that we have had growing up. I mean, even look at like school systems. We're not seeing a lot of like, we don't ask second graders, oh, how can we make this better? But I think, being vulnerable from the top down, like, hey, I'm going to mess up as a teacher, or I'm going to tell me what I can do better. Even that is going to set the tone in the right direction.
Yeah, gosh, Taylor, I really appreciate that perspective, because hearing you talk about it, it's a very powerful point that you made there about as entrepreneurs, because we are CEOs, we are founders, we are the ones in charge. So we think that means we have to have the answers, but you just revealed it there. The answers so often don't come from us. They come from our team members, or even looking at client-based work. They come from our clients. We don't have to have the answers. And it seems to me like you view your role as that facilitator, and you're sharing some questions here in real time with us today, which is, what do you want? How can we make this better? That right there is a very powerful question. How can we make this better? Talk to us about some of those powerful questions that you ask, whether it's on that individual or that organizational basis, to start pulling out the important things, because the answers to those questions, that's what shapes our culture, not necessarily what the CEO says in their press releases. So I'd love to hear some of those questions that you ask.
Yeah, I think on a one-on-one level, when I'm with my therapy clients, one of the first questions I ask are, what are your goals for therapy? What is it that you want to accomplish? I'm also keeping in mind too that while they may be voicing in that here and now moment what exactly they're looking for, I'm trying to keep in mind, like, okay, what's realistic? And are we thinking short term, or are we thinking long term? Take it one step further. What does short term mean? Is that 2 weeks? Is that 3 months? What is long term? Is that years? Or is that next week? I mean, everything is relative. So there's a lot of clarifying questions I ask in order to really get into my client's head and understand it from their perspective. From an organizational standpoint, I created Mizuno Consulting with something in mind of, hey, this is something I can offer. How I go about offering that, I'm not really sure. So I'm going to rely on people that I trust, my team members. Most of the folks that you see on my team are folks that I went to school with when we got our doctorates. And we all had a collective common goal in how we wanted to prioritize certain things in our work, like DEI. But how we approach it really is, it depends on the field, and it depends on who you're working with, what they're open to. There are some folks that want really structured checklist. How do I do this? And most folks want to learn how to be vulnerable, how to tap into emotions, and how to tap into implicit bias and unconscious dynamics that we're not thinking, consciously about 24/7. That's totally okay. It just makes you human. So similar themes, we just want to think of it from like a micro level to a macro level, which can be difficult when you switch that shift. And that's kind of what Mizuno Consulting is for.
Yeah, for sure. And hearing you talk about that, one thing that we talk about very frequently in these conversations is reps, is practice, that we could talk about these things. And you as a consulting agency, when you walk into these organizations, you bring to them great things to the table. But ultimately, of course, we as humans need to take that action, and we need to put the reps in and the practice in. So Taylor, talking about all of these things, and especially picturing, it must be fun, the work that you and your team get to do in the scope of all of these things, because you're talking about real life human matters and human issues. And I so appreciate that. How do we go about getting those reps? Once we've become aware of this, once we've set that stake in the ground of where we want to go and who it is that we want to be individually, but also collectively, how do we start putting it into practice? Are there exercises that we can do? Is it mindfulness where we do some self-reflection? I'd love to hear your insights there.
I really think it kind of depends on the person. But when I do think about building a skill, or building an entrepreneurship skill, or a business skill, or applying any skill is really about challenging yourself. So that may mean entering a challenging meeting, but doing it differently and seeing how it feels. I think oftentimes us as humans, when we're experiencing something that doesn't feel great, we tend to judge it. So if I have a headache, for instance, I get a headache and I go, oh my goodness, this is going to suck. I hate this so much. That's a judgment, really, versus I have a headache. I know how to take care of this. Cold compress, lay down, give it an hour. Cool, on my way. Very different ways of approaching the headache. You want to validate it. You want to say, like, yeah, this is awful. We don't ever want to experience pain. And also, there's really nothing I can do at the moment except give it time. And, equally, when we experience great things, we're not doing a whole bunch of judgment either, which is kind of, opposite ends of the spectrum there. You have a birthday and you go, oh, this is so great. I'm surrounded by all of my friends. But you're not giving it as much weight as you would maybe the not so great things. So building a skill set of entering discomfort with maybe not judgment, but curiosity, that is something therapists say all the time. Enter something with curiosity. What can you pull from it? What can you learn from it? And be okay with not having the answer. Be okay with failure, maybe investigating a bit. What does failure mean? What would failure mean for me? What are some of the narratives I've had about failure? And that's really when maybe one-on-one coaching or even therapy really comes in to organizational work, is you can take a step back on your own and think, oh, this is really influencing the way that I'm approaching this organizational business. And I think that one-on-one coaching or one-on-one therapy is essential with any sort of organizational change.
Yeah, Taylor, I'll tell you what, hearing you talk about these things, I want to call it out for listeners that this is such a treat for us, because it does feel like you get to speak to us, even though thousands of people are listening to us in over 150 countries. It feels so intimate in the way that you view these things. You bring it to such a personable level that it really feels one-on-one. So listeners, we're in for such a treat sitting down with Taylor individually here today. And speaking of curiosity, this is the one thing I knew I had to ask you about today, Taylor, because you are one of the first clinicians to integrate tattoos in tattoo culture within mental health. That is such a new concept, and I want to hear more about that. Give us some insights there.
Yeah, I think I started my tattoo journey being really curious as to why I haven't seen high up professionals with tattoos. And maybe that comes from being a millennial and we haven't seen that much self-expression evolve that much. I've always been one who focuses on identity and how identity impacts our work. Self-expression may be one of the most therapeutic adventures I've ever gone through, and tattoos is one of the ways that I've been able to express myself. So I became really curious about, okay, what purpose is this serving me? Why is it when I step outside my house and I can roll up my sleeve a little bit and I can show off my octopus that's on my arm, why is it that I feel more confident showing that off than I would if I'm wearing a sweatshirt and it's covered? And what I have found is when you can lean into a more authentic self, whatever that may mean for you, it could look many different ways. When you lean into a more authentic self, your confidence is going to flourish. And that's really something that people resonate with and are attracted to. And so, I really love talking about tattoos with my clients and what is it that they're looking for when they're looking for something permanent on their skin. And it's just very different for a lot of different people. It's just very, very fun. And I have a blast talking about it. I could go on forever.
Yeah, I love that, especially because I do think whether someone has tattoos or not, it's an important concept that you're introducing us to, which is self-expression. And us as entrepreneurs, we always hear that advice. If we have a branding expert on, inevitably we talk about being your most authentic self. And I would argue that it's really hard to do that if you don't have the confidence to step into that self-expression. So Taylor, I guess I'm asking you this next question based on your clinical background, but also as a musician and entrepreneur who is slightly rebellious by nature, is Why? Where has self-expression been coached out of us? Because I've got 6-year-old niece and nephew, they're twins. So my 6-year-old niece, she is just someone that it seems like straight from the womb, Savannah decided, I'm going to show the whole world who I am and I'm always going to express myself. And it's so interesting seeing even at that age, they have that sense of self. It's just that creating that environment for them to express themselves. And I hope that my niece and nephew, especially Savannah, who's already there, I hope that they never lose that along the way. But systemically, I feel like there's the educational world, there's the professional world, there's so many things. So with that clinician hat on, but also with the rebellious hat on as an entrepreneur and musician, where does that get coached out of us? Why do we not practice self-expression more openly?
The big buzzword, it's in bold and italicized across your screen. I wish I could put it there, but it's judgment. And, our social norms really set us up for an expectation that may or may not resonate with who we are individually. And that I find that to be very unfair. So being able to remove judgment from your environment, from yourself, and go into things with why do I care about this attitude? And there's so much work that can go into that to get to that point is really key. I think, schools well, I haven't been in elementary school for a while, so I'm unsure what it looks like now. But when I was going through school, we didn't have a lot of wiggle room for what kinds of clothing to wear to school, or, dyeing your hair different colors, or that sort of thing, or even how parents can give us the opportunity to be rebellious and do the thing that kind of looks goofy. So even just, as adults looking at kiddos or looking at kids that are going through a strong developmental phase and saying, they're just figuring it out. They're just working something out for themselves. And it's really kind of cool to see them explore that. So that may not be maybe the most practical option to wear a tutu to 4th grade, but if they feel good in it, cool, rad, see where it goes. And then maybe a little bit of guidance of, where did you come up with that idea? Who modeled that for you? How did it feel to sit in and learn? I don't know what 4th graders learn. Multiplication. That's later. Sure. Multiplication in your tutu. Did you feel like you could really knock out that quiz with more confidence because you felt good in your skin? And there are many, many layers that I could unpack in terms of how to be authentic in your skin. And, but really it comes from societal judgment. So, entering really early on, maybe models of folks that are doing it without implied judgment could set a kiddo up for success. I wish that there was more research and more opportunities to really see that longitudinal study. But yeah, judgment across the board is really the number one influencer in confidence and identity expression.
Yeah, and that's such a powerful theme that you're bringing to today's conversation, and I so appreciate it. And when you say those words of they're just figuring it out, part of me jumps to we're all just figuring it out all along the way. So I'm going to use that as a natural segue to transition and talk to you not only as a subject matter expert that you are, but also as one of us, as a fellow entrepreneur. And Taylor, as we all continue all listeners are at various different growth stages of their own business journeys and personal journeys to go along with that. I'd love to hear some of your insights with your entrepreneur hat on, as far as being a musician, being a clinician. You are also a fellow entrepreneur. What's that journey been like for you? Are there things that have surprised you? Are there elements of it that you go, holy cow, I really like being a business owner. I really like this aspect of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
I think my personal journey has always been, I don't know what I'm going to do next. If I have to plan 5 years ahead, it's not going to happen. Over time, I've kind of learned, all right, well, that uncertainty, there almost comes an amount of comfort now because it's been happening for so long. So I think as an entrepreneur, as an owner of a consulting company, being okay with I don't know what's going to happen. I can't predict the future. I can see trends. I can pay attention to how many clients we had last year versus now and, think ahead in that way. But as far as predicting really what's going to happen, I don't know. If you know somebody that can do that, let me know and I'll quit my job and we'll write a book together. But I think that being able to look ahead and generally plan without anything super concrete and being okay with that's the number one thing that I've learned. In a more kind of like personal level, I'm somebody that really loves schedules and plans, and see, I have got a calendar everywhere I look. You can't see it. But I think it's sort of that CEO mentality of what can I plan for? What would be cool? What could clients thrive off of? That maybe artistic part of my brain gets really excited and really loves to explore these ideas. And I think those ideas are really what sort of separates, if we were to use a C-suite example, maybe a CEO from a COO. It's like, how do you run the business versus like, these are the ideas I have moving forward in our business. Now let's talk about how we implement them. So really, I think it's about that longitudinal thinking, long-term thinking, if you will, and being okay with whatever happens is going to happen. And I can't really plan for the future as much as I want to. I rely heavily on my team to talk things through, and we have lots of fun just being human together. And that's really what we get out of our meetings, is the relationship that we have. At the end of the day, yeah, it's a business, but if the people I work with aren't taken care of and don't feel like they are seen, then I don't feel like I've done my job. I take their health and wellness hands down over the business. So I think just kind of like keeping that in check too is super important. And I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, for sure. I feel like it revealed so much about the way that you think and the priorities and values that you hold near and dear, not only to yourself, but how you've injected those into your business. And I think that that's such profound advice that, as a fellow millennial, part of me wonders, maybe it's just we're getting old now, Taylor, and we've come to that realization of don't be married to things. It really is difficult. I remember in my 20s when I started my consulting business back in 2012, it was a marketing and search engine optimization agency. Taylor, I was so convinced that I had that 5-year, that 10-year roadmap that business school always taught us about. And then I realized things change. Things certainly don't work out. Rejection happens way more frequently as an entrepreneur than I ever imagined. And so you can't be married to those ideas. And I think that that's a really powerful lesson and some insights that you've learned that you've shared with us here today. So before I let you go, I knew we'd be short on time today. I want to squeeze 2 more questions in before we start dropping your links. But I want to ask you, just because I'm so fascinated and impressed in admiration of your musical background. You started studying it at the Bob Cole Conservatory of Music at Cal State University, Long Beach. You've done so many cool things as well in your professional career. How do you manage these days, Taylor, as an entrepreneur, to continue to inject that creativity into the work that you do? I'm curious if you carve aside some creative time or some executive time to just dream big and have those ideas, or how does that manifest in your work?
That's a good question. And I do think it maybe depends on the month and depends on the day. But yes, if I don't carve out time, I'm gonna burn out. Creativity, music, I love drawing and reading. If I don't have time for those things, it's gonna self-combust. So, I really do try to prioritize those things in my life. They really get my creative juices flowing. The people that I get to interact with when I play is just reminds me of who I am. It grounds me. Being on stage is 100% my happy place. I'm a Leo. It just is really my favorite place in the entire world, and it has been since I was very, very young. And I would be lying to you if I said that I wasn't thinking about okay, how can I pull this experience into my work the last time I was on stage, which was just a couple weeks ago. And I think kind of keeping in mind that what works for me is not necessarily what's going to work for my clients. So I really love doing sort of investigative work of, hey, this was an experience I had, and this is what it felt like. Is there something that we can pull from that where we can connect and then move forward together? But at the end of the day, I do have to carve out time for that. And since I started the business, that meant that I needed to cut back a couple of clinical hours just to make sure that I wasn't going to burn out and that I did have time to do the things that I loved.
Yes, huge kudos to you. It is so incredibly important, and I personally know that it's easier said than done. So I love the fact that you continue to do that and pursue those passions and those interests, and importantly, that creativity, because Taylor gives you such an interesting perspective on life, and I'm so grateful for you sharing all of your experiences, and that's why I always look forward to this final question that I ask in all these conversations, which is super broad, so that you can take it in any way that you want, and that is, what's the one takeaway, the one piece of advice that you want to leave listeners with, knowing that they're at all different stages of their business journeys, their personal journeys, their self-expression journeys. You've dropped so many nuggets of knowledge with us here today. So Taylor, good luck summing it up with one incredible takeaway, but the floor is yours.
I think it's embracing failure, whatever that may mean. If you haven't failed in your life, then well done. But I think there isn't one way to do things. And if there's anything that I've learned, it could be zigzaggy and squiggly lines from A to B all day long. And that's 100% okay. That just happens to be my journey. But I think, being vulnerable with yourself and saying, I have more to learn before I do this, or I have more to learn from my colleagues before I make an executive decision. I have more questions to ask before I move forward, taking a breath. And I guess, really asking yourself, will I be okay with this in the end? It's a difficult question to ask, because I do think that we look back on maybe some of the past decisions that we've made with regret, or it may not have been the best investment, and that's okay. Really highlighting, okay, what did I take away from that? How can I move forward without maybe ruminating too much on failure or too much on the past? I guess that would be my major takeaway. I'm sure that will change more as I move through my business.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, Taylor, because I will say, I'll publicly praise you here in the fact that I feel so strongly about the fact that you don't just say these things. You're such a shining example of practicing what you preach, and all the things you've shared with us here today as someone who's gone deep into the wonderful world of all the things that you do work-wise and what your company stands for and the team that you've been building. It just shows up in so many ways in the way that you show up. And I say that you as you, but also you as the entrepreneur, you as the leader of a business, and someone who's really committed to helping all of your clients in so many different capacities. So huge kudos to you. I also know that having seen all these great things that you put into the world, that listeners will probably be really excited to go deeper into all the great things that you're doing. So drop those links on us, Taylor. Where can listeners go from here?
So our website is Mizuno Consulting, Mizuno Consulting.com. Our team's up there. We've got blogs and resources, books that we're reading, that sort of thing. Also, our Instagram is at Mizuno Consulting, and our wonderful marketing coordinator, Andrew, runs that for us. Lots of events are posted there, some reels, that sort of thing. LinkedIn, Mizuno Consulting, LLC, it's all there. Yeah, I hope I can grow it.
Yes. Listeners, you already know the drill. We are making it as easy as possible for you to find all of those links that Taylor just shared for you. So much goodness that they're all putting into the world. So definitely go check out those links. Her business website is at MizunoConsulting.com. You'll see her last name in the title of this episode, so super easy to remember that spelling, or just click right on through using those links down below. We try to make it as easy as possible, including links to the socials, as well as Taylor's personal LinkedIn. So don't be shy. If you want to continue the conversation or you want to start working with with Taylor. You'll find those links directly down below. So Taylor, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.